want to talk to you about today is what I would hope would be and expect would be one of your top 5 brands in terms of importance in your life. But you may not necessarily think about it as a brand, but that is America and what America stands for. And you'll see that we've done some research. Let's see if this advances. Am I up here? Do we have my deck? What? Okay. Well, I'll keep talking. So essentially, I would say that the world is in turmoil right now, and you probably all would agree with me in that regard. And having worked on brands for decades, it struck me that if we think about America as a brand, that it's really in trouble. It's in trouble because all of the things that we have always assumed that it stood for, and those are the basic tenets of why you are usually attracted to a brand, because you automatically have it unconsciously basically filed in your head for what you can depend on it for, is no longer operative. And we know that when brands start to change and start to erode what they stand for, they become very vulnerable. And that scares me when I think about America being vulnerable as a brand, because it's not necessarily representing what we bargained for when we were taught about what America stands for, when the Constitution was put together. And not only is America facing this problem, but so are a lot of the other brand countries around the world. So I thought that trying to get a better understanding of America as a brand, and maybe some other countries as brands, would be a very good R&D project for the Ipsos Neuro and Behavioral Science Center to be able to work with a new tool that we were developing in partnership with our partners Neurome in the implicit reaction time area. So hopefully, do we have a deck yet? Well, I'll just keep talking then. So basically, I was a kid in the 60s, and I went to civics class, like many of you probably did. And you learned that America stood for equal rights for all, and for justice, and for free speech, and for religious freedom, all these things, and that America was the open arms country with respect to bringing all people in from all different countries, and so it was a country based on immigration, and that all these things are really starting to erode. So I'll just talk to you. So we did a study. How many people here have worked with some form of implicit reaction time testing technique? That's great. Because I actually think that it is one of the tools in the neuro toolbox that is going to have the most momentum over the next few years. And one of the reasons for that is because it is applicable to just about anything. Another reason is that it goes very easily into surveys, so it kind of disguises itself as a cognitive measure. And the other reason is it's just so scalable across the world, and it's affordable. I mean, I could go on. But the most important thing about it is that it's the only method that I know of that can really get at conviction and impact with respect to possibly how your perception of a brand has changed. And that's really important because that's based on the neural networks in your brain and the proximity of attributes and basically how you file things in your brain with associations. And that becomes important because when you want to make a decision about a brand, you're taking that shortcut with all the things that are imbued in that brand with respect to expectations and whether it's going to be a good fit for what your motivations are at any given time. So let's catch up, if we will. Aha. That was back when I was in school. Maybe my brothers, not me. It's before my time. Okay. So if you've all worked with implicit, you probably know that it was started as a way to get at racial prejudice. That is one of the best topics possibly for people to not be expected to tell you what they're really feeling inside, either because they don't realize it, or because they don't want to tell you, or because they feel conflicted about it. And when we think about countries as brands, as I said, there's a real danger when citizens stop believing and trust wavers. And I do think that we're on a little bit of a teeter-totter right now of being in this kind of danger. And brands can change. I mean, this page is really to talk about some of the brands that have been held possibly in high esteem, and then something happens that they can fall from grace. And I know we think about that when we think about the presidential elections that are coming up, where you may think that a certain candidate has you know, the firm hold on a certain position, but that vulnerability always lurks, that there could be a scandal tomorrow and it will change the total dynamics of the election. And so there have been issues with Apple, with Disney, with hiring policies. I'm not to say that the brand has gone from great to bad, but there are things that can start to erode our perceptions of a brand and does have some consumers turn away from them. So in this study, we used Neurom's new tool, their new platform called iCode, that has the advantage of being device agnostic and mobile and very easy to use with respect to a very simple interface and real speed of response. And so I want to get to the data because of our little bit delay here. So this study that you're going to see basically was done in the US, France, Mexico, Sweden, and Turkey. There were about 500 per country. We calibrated for individual baselines, taking into account motor skill, computer comfort, et cetera. And there was a battery of attributes that was custom made for each country, done in collaboration with our public affairs division in each country at Ipsos, so that we could get the attributes that really are classically what each country stands for. And then we had some batteries that we feel, some attributes that we feel should cut across with respect to something of interest across the countries. Okay, so reading the metrics, basically we're looking at how many people said yes and how many people said no, and in the middle are people that weren't sure. And we're color coding them. So if it's green, it means that it's fast and that there's high conviction and that there's certainty of response. If it's yellow, it's sort of an uncertainty. If it's red, it means that it's slow and there's a lot of conflict. So let's look quickly at some common attributes. And this is a nice way to see how data behaves when you do implicit reaction time. So there are going to be things that people really agree with at a high level of cognitive response, which is what's classic on surveys, and that they're really going to feel convicted about it. So Sweden, US, Mexico, France, and Turkey, are they a great place to live? Yes. And do you really feel strongly about it? Yes. People love their countries. But it doesn't always go that way. So if you ask people if their country will ever be as great again, or in this case will never be as great again, you have a lot of people uncertain on both sides of the fence. So only 27% of people in America agreed with it, but they're not sure, and the people that said no, they're not sure. This tells us that there's huge ambivalence about where the country's headed and how people worry about that. Should we welcome immigrants? 50% of Americans say yes. Again, this was the country that was supposed to be give me your tired and your poor. And those 50% are sure. Those that disagree are not so sure. And look at Mexico. 54% say yes, but they don't really mean it. You can also look at this tool as a way to cliché bust. So for those of you that have done a lot of international work over the years, you'll see that Mexico down here, only 18% said yes to this with respect to stands for justice. Only 18%, which just astounded me. So I was down in Mexico and I talked to people about this and they said, yeah, it's true. There's been so much corruption that we don't really feel it stands for justice anymore. So if you expect people in Latin American countries, as the cliche is, to agree with everything on surveys, this is a good case in point where that's not true. What you see is people are really using the scale. Gives equal rights to all. What's with America? That should be 95%. 33% said yes and they're not sure. reflects my values. Again, in America, 35%, and they're not sure. Getting better. We did the US as the first country, so we used this attribute differently. We said is doomed, and we found that 20% said yes, but they're not sure, and 49% said no, but they're not sure. So people in America are really not sure. Are we doomed? That's a terrible state of the union. A deep dive on America stands for justice. I'm kind of disgusted by this, to be honest with you, because I think it should be 95%, and it's only 52%. If we don't stand for justice in America, what do we stand for? Upholding the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. What do we get a high agreement with great passion on? We favor the rich at 71%, and is suffering from bad leadership. 59% say yes with great conviction. And maybe that's part of the problem. So what are some of the big reds? Here you see in other countries, things like limiting freedom of speech. In Turkey, very strict health regulations. That's a story I'll tell you about over drinks in Sweden. I'm going to go fast because my timer's not working. Am I doing okay on time? Okay. A country I'm proud of. So the good news is, at the end of the day, people do still have pride in America. So that gives me a little bit of hope, but we have a lot to do to get back on the right track. I'm going to go really fast. I think I'm going to end there because I don't know how long I've been on. But I will say that one of the things that made me feel really good about this study, besides getting some good evidence for my hypothesis, getting experience with this new platform to see how beautifully it worked, was a sense that as researchers we really can advance knowledge, not just about our day-to-day brands, but also about our countries, our cultures, and the world at large, and that these tools cut across, and that a lot of things are brands beyond our everyday CPG. And with that, I'll take questions. Thanks.
Do we have questions in the audience?
So with your, the speed of reaction time, you had it grouped into these three buckets. How did you go about that process? And did you normalize for individual variability?
We normalize for each individual. We have a really kind of an elegant calibration set of tools up front that go very fast but enable us to understand what's fast for you, because what's fast for you may be slow for me and vice versa. And then we're looking at the delta between what's average for you versus how you rate the other statements. And really what we're even defend himself. I just know from his speed of reaction. That's the beauty of most neuro tools. Most neuro tools are rooted in what we know intuitively, except they're a lot faster, more sophisticated, and more accurate. So if you think about something like facial coding, we look at facial coding all the time. We read people's faces, but what facial coding does is it systematizes it. And a lot of these neuro tools really are based on things that we're hardwired to understand. Anybody else?
I just have a question on your great again slide. Will we ever be great again? Was that ever connected to this Trump slogan? Because it does give some insights as to the power of that.
No, I think the actual field work might have been done before he introduced that slogan.
But it's interesting because it seems...
And it's funny, I didn't even make the connection. I should.
It seems like there should be there's some kind of issue there that makes that...
There's an ambivalence.
There's an ambivalence.
It actually, that's a really brilliant insight. It suggests why he's touching something so deeply in American, because we're so worried that we're not going to be great again. We're frightened. And he's really leveraging fear.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
Melissa,
you.
thank you very much.